Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. We are lifelong Catholics, and what we do is all for free and for our love of Jesus Christ and for our Holy Mother, the Church, and we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today, finally, we're going to get back to Father John Courtney Murray, his recruitment by Luce, and why is he such a man of mystery? We welcome Brother Alexis to the program.
Thank you, AJ, for having me back on Ordo Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure, and it is a particular pleasure in this documentary series on the doctrinal warfare program that the U.S. government has against the Catholic Church and has been engaged in for the last 70 years, and the ruin it has brought to the Catholic Church. And Luce is the mastermind. We've talked about that. And he started this project in a meeting in April of 48, in this meeting at the Biltmore Hotel. And maybe speak more about that before we get into how he recruited John Courtney Murray.
Yeah, so it was a meeting of Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. And it was a secret meeting that was never to be published, but thankfully, the author, David A. Wimhoff, lawyer and law professor at the University of Notre Dame, used his credentials to find the documents. Here's a little.
Why do you think? Yeah, why do you think this meeting was so hush hush?
It was as if the laity knew exactly what was going on. You remember that animated movie of the Beauty and the Beast where they come with the pitchforks and torches? They're gonna kill the beast. I think that would happen. The Crusader spirit. The Crusader spirit would reawaken.
Mm-hmm. So what did they discuss at this meeting?
It was pretty much on church and state and how to Americanize the Catholic Church. And here's some more of the meeting. Another was to understand the philosophical and theological differences dividing Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, and use the same words with the same meaning in setting them forth. And a third was a statement on church and state, prepared on June 12, 1948, and signed 5 days later by Protestants who have been present at the meeting and by the president of the Union Theological Seminary, who had not been present. This statement of the Protestant position, which ultimately proved unworkable, condemned the Supreme Court's holding in McCollum, claiming that the decision would greatly accelerate the trend towards the secularization of our culture. The McCollum decision also threatened the American people's history of cooperation between church and state, which allowed that cooperation entered into freely by the state and the church, and devolving no special privilege to any church and no threat to the religious liberty of any citizen should be permitted. So, and that secularization we have.
Yeah, I mean, not only is Christianity not mentioned in public schools, anti-Christianity is promoted in public schools. And that's certainly a very bad result. So following this meeting, Luce decided to form a committee, recruit Catholic theologians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Murray agreed with the NCCJ, which was the Christians and Catholics and Jews, weird name at the Biltmore. When it came to the church-state relations, Catholicism was the problem, not America. Or as he later put it, the church-state problem is, in a very specific and unique sense, a Catholic problem, a Roman Catholic problem. By agreeing to provide a more liberal interpretation of church doctrine on church and state relations, Murray was embarking upon an enterprise that would eventually weaken one of the most important doctrines of the Catholic Church. This was certainly the position of Paul Blanchard, a rabid anti-Catholic, who had written a number of articles attacking the Catholic Church and its various doctrines in the nation, beginning November 7th, 1947, and continuing July 1948. By the time of the Biltmore Hotel Secret Conference, Blanchard had written critiques of the church's doctrines on sex, reproduction, education, how these doctrines would impact divorce, birth control, and the contents of school courses. He had also written about the church's relationship with fascism and the Lateran Treaty of 1929, with which Mussolini gave the church and Catholicism preeminence in Italy.
So they set the stage by unleashing one of their very explicit haters of Catholicism. Then they have to solve the problem by getting Catholics to work with Protestants and Jews. So it's pretty obvious that they do. So the result will not be to defend the church against the attacks. The result will be to cause the church to collapse in the face of the attacks.
Yep.
And how many years pass before Luce runs into John Courtney Murray? And
that would be would have been in 1948.
Okay. And when did they first meet?
At the Biltmore Conference.
Oh, so he was already invited. Okay. So now let's talk about John Courtney Murray. People may not know his name. I think my parents would probably have heard his name in that generation. He's very well known in liberal circles, but if you're a normal Catholic in the United States, you probably have never heard of him, although he's had an effect on everything that goes on in the church in the United States, and he's probably one of the biggest ones that's ruined it. So when was he born? Where was he born? Who was his parents?
Yeah, so born Michael John Murray in Manhattan on September 12th, 1904. And we figured out it was on December 3rd, 1903. December 1903.
12th. Yeah, December 12th.
When he was conceived. And he changed his name after entering the Jesuits from Michael to John Courtney Murray.
Yeah, so here's some two interesting things. So he was conceived on 12/12/03, which is equivalent of 333, and that's a Masonic number. And his father was a bookkeeper in Manhattan, so most likely knew Masons or was a Mason. And when you become a Jesuit, you don't change your name. So he changes his name. He gets rid of Michael, who's the archangel, who's like unto God. That name is repulsive to Satanists. And he adds his mother's surname, which is something you just don't do. I mean, if you're an Irish, that's not done. Spanish do that, but he's not Spanish. So he adds his mother's surname, Courtney, there. I guess he wants to sound a bit elitist. And that's just strange. There's some other strange things. He's ordained a priest when he's 33 years old.
Yeah.
And well, that might just be coincidence, but there's that satanic 33 again. And most people think, well, that's Jesus Christ. But the Masons take 33 as representing the angels, percentage of angels who are cast out of heaven.
Mhm.
And he got a doctorate at the Gregorian, but he spends like 3-4 years touring Europe in the mid-30s. And we can't figure out what he was doing, but he comes back from Europe and he starts teaching at a faculty at Woodstock Theological Institute, which is what outside of Baltimore, no?
Yeah.
And as a professor, he wouldn't be drafted. So he was not a military chaplain in the Second World War. He didn't stand by the troops who were fighting the free Nazis. It almost makes it appear that he didn't want to fight the Nazis. And that's also very telling about John Courtney Murray. And he remained a professor his whole life. He wasn't a pastor, but it was like almost impossible to find out when he was ordained. So who ordained him? What was the day? And what kind of bishop was this that ordained him?
Yeah. Let's go to see if we can find you. All right. So if you type in the ordination of John Courtney Murray onto your search results, nothing will come up. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to my other special computer and type in the ordination class of Woodstock College in 1933. That pops up what is called the Woodstock Letters, which are hidden on the Jesuits' web page. And it is on June 25th, 1933, that he is ordained by Archbishop Michael Joseph Curley of Baltimore.
Now, this is really interesting. So ordinations of priests are in that epoch were done on high feast days. So you'd be ordained a priest on the 29th of June, that's Peter and Paul, or the 24th of June, St. John the Baptist, or in the Feast of the Sacred Heart. But June 25th is exactly 6 months away from Christmas. That's also Masonic and satanic in the sense of you're opposed to Jesus Christ. Maybe this is all coincidence, but he was known for something really bizarre, that if you entered his office, he had a cross in his office, which was missing what?
The corpus.
See, it wasn't just a cross without a corpus. It was a cross that had a corpus, and the corpus was removed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what Catholic priest wouldn't want to see Christ crucified on the cross?
Yeah.
What Catholic priest would remove it and as out of hatred for it?
Mm-hmm.
And he never served in a pastoral role. He wasn't assigned to a parish. And so it's almost like he didn't have to act as a priest, or why did he become a priest? So
yeah. So
those are very strange things. But now his thought and how he became a friend of Luce, and what are some of the things he advocated?
yeah. So Murray himself started out critical of America. In an article which appeared in 1932, Murray discussed the situation in the 16th century, noting that the Protestant menace evoked a lamentable lack of unity as regards the proper method of dealing with it. 8 years later, Murray had even harsher words for America in a series of talks he gave at St. Joseph's College. Our first question must be, he began, what is the actual problem confronting us here today in America? What have we actually to do? It would seem that our American culture, as it exists, is actually the quintessence of all that is decadent in the culture of Western Christian world. It would seem to be erected on the triple denial that has corrupted Western culture at its roots. The denial of metaphysical reality, of the primacy of the spiritual over the material, of the social over the individual. Hence, in the view of the fact that American culture is built on the negation of all that Christianity stands for, it would seem that our first step toward the construction of a Christian culture should be the destruction of the existing one. In the presence of Frankenstein, one does not reach for baptismal water, but for a bludgeon.
Now, just to comment on this, this might seem to be very different from modern liberal Jesuit thought, but it's identical. Why? The same spirit of hate.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very different kind of critique than Catholics would look at something, because Catholics would want to baptize, not kill. And so the idea that you must destroy is not a Christian idea, it never was. And the fact that he called America Frankenstein is kind of strange. Now, he gave this talk, and 8 years later, after 32, so he gave this talk in 1940.
Mm-hmm.
And so the war is on. Okay, you're a Catholic priest, your country's at war, or is about to go into war, and you're saying that America's the Frankenstein. I mean, Hitler's conquering countries all over Europe, invading things, burning cities down, raping women, and America is the Frankenstein. Now, I and AJ would be the first to say America is not perfect, and there's big problems here, but we never use that word.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of hate there, and hate usually feigns to be what it's not, and so we'll see his thought develop. So he started being critical of America, but he changed his tune quick.
Yeah. But he goes on to he continues, profound materialism, oriented almost wholly to matter in the things of sense. It has had, in fact, one dominating ideal, the conquest of a material world with the aid of science. A conquest has made one promise, more abundant life for the ordinary man and woman, the abundance being ultimately in physical comfort. It turns out one typical product, the Homo economicus, the businessman in a business suit, whose dream of paradise are of a land in which there is no red ink, has given citizens everything to live for and nothing to die for. He has gained a continent and lost its own soul.
And this is written by a priest who, at the end of his life, didn't even wear his priestly vestments. He wore a business jacket.
Mm-hmm. Then goes into intercreedal cooperation, whatever that is.
That's cooperation between different religions.
So, from a priest who should be a former Catholic priest who should have been kicked out to one who was. Former Catholic priest and close observer of things, Carlo Falconi described the idea of intercedal cooperation or ecumenism as Protestant on origin. The popes up to John the 23rd made the great mistake of underestimating it. As the leper priest Saint Damien of Gloucester observed in Hawaii, Protestantism had always worked to reorder societies and increase materialism. Ecumenical or intercedal movement was no exception to this rule. It helped Protestantism eliminate confessional barriers, thereby serving to advance the materialist or capitalist spirit. As professor and statesman Amintore Fanani explained it. In time, the American moneyed elites realized the importance of this movement in furthering their own decidedly anti-Catholic purposes and interests. According to Fanani, Protestant societies promoted individual autonomy and democracy in creating societies in which everyone was to be treated as the same or equal. Individual autonomy mandated freedom of choice, and that choice had to be protected and encouraged by the state through government policies. This understanding of freedom of choice was consistent with commercial society which buying and selling were all important. Freedom to choose came into being as an economic concept, but soon spread to matters of politics, religion, and morality. The individual autonomy that was so characteristic of capitalistic systems allowed for the concentration of wealth or power and was accompanied by materialism, which in turn bred a weakening of Catholic faith, which holds that a man should eschew a certain mode of action in the certainty of losing riches, but believing they will gain a future reward in heaven.
That's a rather good criticism of American culture, pretty much, although it's a secular criticism. It's not a theologic criticism, because wealth is not opposed to faith. Avarice can be an enemy of faith, and it is an enemy of spiritual life, obviously. But the problem in America is that Christ is not confessed to be the King, the Lord, the Master, and his teaching to be the foundation of law. And a nation that does that reorders everything in the right way. And without that, whether it's geared to socialism or capitalism, it doesn't really matter. It's going to wander away from the truth because it doesn't have Christ, who is the truth. So that was his one of his early interventions. But then he goes on to meet Luce, and does he start writing for one of Luce's magazines, or how did Luce use him in his program?
Yeah, so he wrote, let's see here. He wrote for the American magazine.
Which is the Jesuit National Magazine.
Yeah. We'll be right back, folks. I'm gonna pause it right here. We are back. So he starts writing with Luce, and Luce begins controlling, magazines. And America becomes part of the magazine. And it is here where he starts writing about church and state and religious liberty.
And he didn't get a good welcoming in the United States, didn't he? Wasn't he heavily criticized?
Mm-hmm. And so, see, the meeting at the Biltmore was not the first time Murray addressed the issue of church and state. Beginning in 1945, the article that appeared in Theological Studies is other posts he controlled at the college he was ordained at.
At Woodstock.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Theological Studies. He started publishing on the topic of religious liberty and church-state relations. He began with Current Theology, Freedom of Religion, which was a response to various statements by Presbyterian John Mackay. He proceeded with writing Freedom of Religion, The Ethical Problem, and Religious Liberty, and Inquiry in March of 1946. America magazine, where he served as associate editor in 1945 and 46, published his articles about the same topic, including separation of church and state. December 7th, 1946, True and False Concept, Separation, Church and State. February 16th, 1947, The Court Upholds Religious Freedom. March 8th, 1947, and Religious Liberty, the Concern of All. America, Freedom, February 7th, 1948.
Okay, so he started writing on this topic, and that's probably why he got his invitation to the Biltmore, though Henry Luce evidently felt he could wing him into his project. And I want to point out this because there's a lot of discussion on religious liberty and what is the Catholic position. But the Catholic position is that in the sight of God, you have the duty to believe God when he reveals himself. And that is liberty to believe in God when he proposes it to you is a natural right, but it's also in the divine order. God wants you to freely choose the truth. But that's not what we mean. That is not religious liberty. Okay, religious liberty is the concept that in a state, do Catholics have the right to practice their faith? Okay, or should we tolerate other people's right to practice the faith? And as soon as you enter into that discussion, you've divorced the discussion from the Catholic faith, because the Catholic faith is the only true religion, and all men have a duty to believe in God as he revealed himself. So Catholics cannot be oppressed or restricted in their religious activities because they're doing the will of the Creator. No one else is doing the will of the Creator. And if a state recognizes that no one else is doing the will of the Creator, not only the state state really shouldn't grant them liberty to do it. The state should repress anything immoral or false they're doing. If a state was truly sane and knew who the God and recognized who the true God was, it wouldn't say something like, God was a marshmallow or a bowl of spaghetti, because that's obviously a blasphemy to the Creator. But a state who intentionally declares that it doesn't know who the true God is or whether it is a God, and therefore everyone can practice religion, is a state that's blinded itself, and it's not culpable in that, because everyone can know who the true God is and examine the evidence. And any government could hold a commission and examine which religion is true, and by principles, rational principles, and the evidence of miracles arrive that the Catholic Church is the only religion that's backed by miracles, and therefore it's the only one that must be true. So, but a state that's willfully ignorant and willfully blind has no right to start saying what the Catholic Church can and cannot do, and certainly cannot pretend to say what other religions can or cannot do, because it is chosen blindness, not truth, as its principle. So as soon as a Catholic starts discussing religious liberty, he's trapped into a system where you already presume the Catholic Church is not the true faith. Okay, so all Murray has to do is promote religious liberty, and he's actually undermining the Catholic faith just from that. And that's what's wrong with Nostra Aetate in Vatican II.
Yeah. So then Murray went on from there, formulated a Catholic take on the American or Protestant position on church and state, which saw religious liberty being a positive good. In general, he did so by using Protestant concepts, twisting papal teaching to support American ideas, then elevating social peace or political harmony to a position as the greater good. He also redefined Catholic terms and concepts to support American institutions. One example was the emphasis on public order, as opposed to the common good, which was indicative that Murray adopted the position of the Federal Council and its successor, the World Council of Churches. Now, those guys we did a show on was Nelson Rockefeller, Hess, and all those other guys who paid the Vatican $20 million to push an ecumenical council, which became Vatican II.
Yeah, they're the ones that actually cooked up the agenda of Vatican II years before. And that was at the meeting in 53, 52. That's when they do that. So Murray is doing the undermining of the intellectual evidence by writing all this stuff and making it appear to be Catholic when it's not. And you wouldn't recognize it unless you start thinking of the higher principles and the greater truth, and not reducing the discussion down to a Protestant. The Protestants have to discuss religious liberty because they're not united. There's all different forms of Protestantism, and therefore they can't admit that there's a true form of Christianity. They can't discuss truth in regard to Christianity, because then they'd all be at each other's throats.
Then he goes another way. This is getting kind of confusing. Twisting himself into knots here. Another was to focus the church-state argument on human individual. He was also selective in reviewing and quoting various writings of popes, from Pope Pius VII to Pope Pius XII, avoiding any provisions that contradicted America's organizing principles. Murray's greatest polemical achievement was making the natural law an equivocal term at best, the basis of public policy, thereby bringing about the dethronement of Christ, all in the name of social peace. All in all, it was a stunning reversal of the positions he had taken just 5 years earlier.
Yet here we come back to why the corpus is not on the cross in his office. Because where is Christ chiefly enthroned is on the cross.
Mhm.
By his passion and death on the cross, he merits to become the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He merits as a man to become a King of Kings. And so it's very consistent. We see absolute consistency between his thought to dethrone Christ in the world and the fact that he can't seeing Christ on the cross, and the fact that he wasn't a priest who's out to save souls. And if you think that the common good requires public peace and that we should all get along together, then how do you explain that the church was born in 10 persecutions under the Romans, and hundreds of thousands of Catholics were put to death simply because they wanted to practice their faith and they wouldn't budge an inch to the demands of the state? So if we just want to get along, then we're actually not being faithful to Christ. That's just impossible. And we see this in so many topics like abortion. Once abortion was made illegal by the Supreme Court in the United States, if the Catholic hierarchy was truly had the Holy Spirit in them, they would have blocked the streets of the cities, the capitals, the hospitals. They would have shut down the nation in a national strike, and they wouldn't have stopped until the law was repealed. And they could have done that in 3 months. But they never had the will to do that. Our shepherds in America never had the will to do that because they were already infected by John Courtney Murray's concept that public order and peace is the most important thing. And that's why 65 million children have been killed in the United States. And that sin has brought darkness and blindness on the bishops in the United States. That's why they're so completely blinded to the things of God.
And in the next program, we want to continue with a few more of his ideas, which set the stage. That was a brewing fight between the Catholics and Protestants in the 1940s.
Okay, but it's important to understand the thought of John Murray and why this was weaponized against the church everywhere. So this might seem like a long delay. What does this have to do with the doctrinal warfare of the United States government against the Catholic Church? But Murray was the cannon. He was the one that started launching the ideologic bombs. Unless you know how dangerous his thought was and how destructive it is, it seems pretty much what you probably hear from preached every Sunday, that we should get along and obey the government. And, they wouldn't have been able to pull off the scamdemic without John Courtney Murray, because the Catholic Church would have resisted the control of the church for danger of a virus.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Ordo Militaris Radio TV.
Yep. This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Day is full.
Day is full.